Hello everyone, Nick here again for What Game Now, and today we're going to talk about the Khador theme force called the Armored Core. You can see in the background picture here, this is a rather interesting theme force. It's a little bit one-sided, but it's very good at what it does. So, who are the Armored Core? So the Armored Core are a branch of the Khadoran army, and instead of taking to the field as regular infantry, they take to the field in what are called man-of-war suits. These come to the fact that Khador does not use light Warjacks. Everything they have is heavy or better, Colossals. So they don't have an intermediary between infantry and heavy Warjacks. In other nations like Signar, Menoth, and Krix, that's taken up by light Warjacks. In Khador, they instead developed the Man-of-War suit, which is essentially a suit of steam-powered armor. Increases the strength and resilience of a man, but in general, they're pretty slow and hulking. This allows them to wield weapons that are on par with what a Warjack could carry, and at the same time, take hits that would kill a normal man. The Khadoran army uses these guys as predominantly shock troops and heavy assault elements. So if they need to go clear out a fortress or there's a heavily entrenched position, the tip of the spear will be the Armored Core, the man-of-war elements. This theme force is composed pretty much of man-of-war units. The only really exceptions are mechanics, which are there to repair the man-of-war, so you could argue they fit in there. And they do actually have access to some battle engines and some very heavy cavalry elements. So, onto the theme force itself. You can see from the army composition here, any Khador Warcaster is legal, any non-character Warjack is legal. Very interesting to note here is there is not any character Warjacks allowed beyond what the bond rules allow. So you can always include a Warjack, a character Warjack, in an army, regardless of theme force, if it has a bond for the Warcaster it's assigned to. So, for example, the Khador Warjack Torch has a bond with Strakov. You could play Strakov in this theme force, and he can bring Torch. Nobody else can bring Torch. So this is a theme force with no inherent character jacks, which is very interesting. Man-of-war models and units. This is any solo battle engine, unit, anything like that that has the Man-of-War in the name or the tags. There's quite a few of these. There's 3 units, and there's, I think, 4 or 5 solos, if I recall right off the top of my head. We get battle mechanics. These are necessary because one of the most important aspects of the Armored Core is that the Man-of-War are repairable, which is abnormal for a lot of other armies. You can actually heal your infantry as the game is going, and this is a very rare ability. Battle mechanics are what's going to let you do that, and in some cases you're repairing more than 1 hit point at a time. The next 2 notes here are the Greylord Adjutant and the War Dog solo. So these particular solos are actually caster attachments. The Greylord Adjutant, or the Adjunct, I'm sorry, has a few abilities. He lets you upkeep a spell for free. He can center a cloud on a friendly model. He has a spray attack. He can also hand out eyeless sight and magical weapons to a friendly model, which is a very big deal for this theme force. This theme force has no inbuilt magic weapons. So being able to hand it out to somebody you want is a big deal. And then finally, the War Dog is essentially a defensive piece. He'll make your caster a little harder to hit. It has counter charge. It actually is an okay late game model, and both of them are solo, so they can grab objectives. This is interesting because you get both your choice in here. Like I said, no character Warjacks. Other than that, there's not a lot of commentary here. You get the standard 1 mercenary unit in solo. You do not get the ranking officer, which is very important, which means you can't make them Khador faction, which means that the mercenary units tend to be very rare in this theme force. There is 1 exception that we'll get to, but we'll get to them. All right, requisition options. This is pretty standard. You get 1 command attachment. It's worth noting that all of the Man-of-War units have a command attachment, and Man-of-War are very expensive, so these command attachments can potentially save you a lot of points. 1 tanker solo. So tankers are super heavy Man-of-War suits. They're even slower than their regular. They're the same speed as their brethren, but much more heavily armed, much harder to kill, and they mount significant ranged weapons. So the Man-of-War strike tanker is a heavy artillery piece, where the suppression tank is anti-infantry. These solos are very important in the theme force because they help you bring guns to the table, which is something this theme force can struggle with. And then lastly, one smaller medium-based Khador solo. The smaller medium-based Khador solo matters here because there actually is a large base solo allowed in this theme force called the Warjacks. He is a 9-point cavalry model that hits like a Mack truck, and if you kill him, he gets off his horse and attempts to beat you to death. Really good model, but he's not available for free. The notable requisition options here are the command attachment. The most common one is the demo core attachment, who I believe is like 6 points. He's really expensive. And then 2 tankers of your choice is the common spread for requisition at 75 points. Special rules: when a model in this army is affected by the repair special rule, remove 1 additional damage point. So your mechanics are even more efficient. And last one, and the big one, this is the really important bonus here. Man-o-war units and tanker solos gain advanced move. Advanced move is before the start of the game, but after both players have deployed. So there's a gap right there between start of the first turn and end of deployment. Every man-o-war unit and tanker may make a free full advance. Now, full advance is not a run and is not a charge. You may move up to your speed value in inches, and you cannot benefit from any abilities or anything like that because it's not during activation. So it's a free 4-inch move for your man-o-war units. This is really important because one of the big weaknesses of this theme force is speed, and that actually ties into our next slide. I threw this in here based off some of the initial feedback on the first videos, a comprehensive strengths and weaknesses. You can actually see in the top left of this picture a suppression tanker, just to give you an idea of what we're talking about with that. All right, strengths. This is a very heavily armored theme force. High armor stats across the board. The gen generator guys are very hard to kill, and they have multiple hit points, both of which are crucial in making this army survive. One of the downsides of this theme force is low number of attacks, so having your guys stay on the table a long time is really important. Second off, caster selection. This is a very open theme force when it comes to which casters work and which ones don't. The only ones that you really kind of want to avoid, the only ones you really want to avoid are the casters who have no synergy whatsoever. There's 1 or 2 of those. Or the casters that are predominantly Jack focused. This theme force does not usually run Warjack heavy, because there's other theme forces that just do it better. There's nothing about the man-o-war that you're getting out of that exchange. The last strength is it's what we call a skew list in Warmachine. What this means is it presents your opponent with a question. In the case of man-o-war, can you deal with all the beef and all the armor? If the answer is no, you are going to be playing in the sprinkler. You're going to have a great day. You're just going to kind of waltz over your opponent. There's not much they're going to be able to do about it. However, this is also a downside, as it says in the weaknesses below. Skew lists, if your opponent has the answer, fold very quickly. If your opponent can deal with your armor, and there are ways to deal with it, there's actually a decent number of them, this theme force really struggles, because that's kind of its only game plan. Other weaknesses, it's slow. Most of your army is speed 4. Put your models down. Look at a scenario and try and participate in the scenario when you're speed 4. You can have some problems, especially if you're not careful. Low hitting power. The individual models in this theme force hit decently well for infantry. There's a couple really big hitters, the Warjacks and the demo core being the best example. But the biggest reason why I put low hitting power on here is the volume of attacks. These man-o-war armies tend to be very low model count, or relatively low model count compared to an infantry-heavy list. And most of your weapons and most of your offense is in melee attacks, which makes your army very, it can struggle with large numbers. And if your opponent has a really heavy target, you may not be able to get enough attacks on it between your speed and just the physical size of your models, because the average model is on a 40mm base. So you can have some trouble dealing with super heavy targets. And the last one is, it's kind of interesting, that's actually vulnerable to really big guns. If your opponent has really heavy artillery, it can start picking off man-o-war a long way away. And because you're so slow, they're generally going to get an extra turn, maybe even 2, depending on the terrain. and every man you lose matters. This Khador does not have the ability to bring back dead models, so every guy you lose is going to hurt. Long-range, high-power guns are going to consistently be picking off a guy every turn, so that can really hurt. So when we go forward, we're going to look to either cover our weaknesses or accentuate our strengths. Both of them are equally valid. All right, Warcasters. So there's a lot of Warcasters that are really good in this theme force. There's a valid argument for almost every single one. Usually what they're doing is they're trying to cover your weakness in hitting power or delivery. So you're either looking for casters that are going to buff your damage output, either of the Man of War or of something else. You're looking for casters who will do something to help you get across the table, or some combination of those abilities. So just run through a few that I picked out. Sorcia 3, who's pictured here to the right, she can put out a Cloud Wall. She has the Iron Flesh spell, which is an armor buff. And just all told, it makes her a very strong caster for getting your guys across the table. She has the added benefit of having an ability called Field Marshal Flank. So Field Marshal Flank, the Field Marshal class of rules are on Warcasters, or solos with the battle group rule. So if you have a Field Marshal, Warjacks under your control gain that ability. Regardless of any other factors, the Warjacks gain this ability. Hers is Flank, specifically Flank Man of War. When the Warjack attacks an enemy model that's in the melee range of a Man of War model, the Jack gets +2 to hit and an additional die of damage. So while she's not buffing the Man of War, she is actually making her Jacks run decently well and hit hard, which can keep you in the game later on. Interestingly enough, she is the most Jack heavy of the Man of War casters. Because of this, she can get away with running less Man of War, more Jacks. All the other ones are going to want lots of Man of War. Next up is Vlad 1. Vlad 1 has a spell called Signs Importance, which is a feat level effect. There are casters whose feat is Signs Importance. Vlad can do it every turn. Signs Importance is whenever you make an attack, if you're in Vlad's control area, your models will roll 1 additional dice to hit and 1 additional dice to damage. Discard the lowest result. The result of that is it's not quite, but it's really close to just a flat +2 damage buff and a +2 to hit buff, which helps your guys hit a lot harder. Irusk 2 is a personal favorite of mine. He is kind of toolboxy. He has an extra dimension to him that a lot of the other Khador casters are missing. He brings a damage buff in the form of Battle Lust. He has a spell called Solid Ground, which is really helpful when he hands out Tough to friendly models. So Tough is when your guy loses all of his hit points, roll a d6. On a 5 or a 6, he's knocked down, but still alive. Solid Ground says you're not knocked down. So your guy could potentially eat 2 or 3 shots before he dies. And the last one he has is a spell called Desperate Ground, which is a way to hand Pathfinder out to the Man of War. This doesn't make them faster, but it does help them around terrain, so you might get from point A to point B a little bit quicker. Last one is Butcher 1. Butcher 1 is Iron Flesh like Sorcia, which is +2 armor and no blast damage. He has the spell Fury, which is +3 to melee attack damage rolls, which is pretty significant. And his feat is just a blanket +1 additional damage dice to models in his control area. So he takes your Man of War and says, go hit really hard. Really, really, really hard. All of a sudden, Man of War are punching above their weight class. So lots of really good choices, and the list can go on and on and on. The ones you kind of want to avoid, Zerkova 2. So Zerkova 2 really doesn't like being in Armored Core. She doesn't really give them anything, and her abilities synergize really well with magic users. You'll see her in the theme force with the Doom Reavers and the Grey Lords a lot. So I would recommend avoiding her. Yes, she looks cool. Yes, she's got her Reaver bodyguard, but just on the whole, she has a lot of dead abilities when it comes to the Man of War. And then the other two I'd recommend avoiding are Harkovich and Karchev. So Harkovich and Karchev are both Jack-heavy casters. Harkovich is a little more gun-oriented. Karchev is a little more melee-oriented. You're dealing with a theme force here that has no direct benefits to Warjacks aside from being able to repair a little bit more. But here's the thing. Repairing Warjacks is actually really hard in battle with how much they need to move around. So that's You're not going to get a jack damaged, pull it back, and repair it. That's not going to happen. Okay, you can't move far enough. Your opponent, it doesn't work. So there's no real benefit to running a Jack Heavy build in Armored Core. So the Jack Heavy casters, Harkovich and Karchev, I just recommend avoiding them. If you want to do that, play the Jack Heavy theme, which I think is Jaws of the Wolf. I'd have to go back and look. The names in Khador are a little weird. They're not what I would anticipate. Warjacks. The most common Warjacks selected for Armored Core are Warjacks that have long-range guns. The most common one being the Victor. He's a Colossal. He's enough points that a lot of people just take a Victor as their entire battle group of Warjacks. Giant howitzer mortar on the back, long range, hits really hard. The two little side guns hit decently well. And when he punches something to death, he really, really punches something to death, especially if you're running with like Sorsha 3. If you're not interested in swinging for a Colossal, a couple of jacks you might consider are the Kodiak and the Marauder, which are two generically good choices. Sorry about that. The Kodiak is cheap. It has Pathfinder, which lets it move around quite a bit, which can help your theme force by getting models where they need to go. And the Marauder has a extra dice damage versus huge bases. So against super heavy, huge base targets, he's actually kind of helpful. Jacks you kind of want to avoid, the Rager, the Berserker, and the Mad Dog. Their guns aren't exciting enough. Their melee attacks aren't exciting enough. There is a slight argument to be had for a couple of Mad Dogs under Sorsha 3, but I'd still rather just take Kodiaks or Marauders at that point. The Devastator is kind of cute. So the Devastator is basically a bowling ball on legs. It has got 2 shields. It doesn't really make attacks, but it's almost unkillable, which is really nice because your Man-O-War are so slow that redeployment is hard. So the Devastator lets you plop him in a scenario zone, and you basically don't have to worry about that scenario zone for a very long time. You can concentrate the rest of your army elsewhere, which the Man-O-War really appreciate because redeploying is going to be very hard. Units, there's 5 of them. 3 of them are Man-O-War combat units. One of them is a support unit, which you see here, and the other one is the mechanics. All of them are really good. The one that's only slightly less good is the Bombardiers. But just to run through them, the Demo Corps are your hard hitters. Pretty much every list starts with a unit of Demo Corps and their attachment. Shock Troopers are defensive even by Man-O-War standards. They can sit in the zone, they can take a punch, they hit reasonably well. What's not to love? Bombardiers are a ranged element. The ranged element can be a little flaky because Khador doesn't really support the guns that well. So I would really look to casters like Vlad 1 if you want to run Bombardiers. Anybody who can help the ranged output. Command attachments. The Demo Corps always get their command attachment. The Shock Troopers usually get their commander attachment. The Bombardiers can have it if you have points, and the mechanics don't really need theirs unless you desperately need the filler, and in that case, take a solo. Arkanovich, this guy here, is a support unit for the Man-O-War. He's actually a 2-man unit. Arkanovich is on the right, and he's got a standard bearer on the left. Excellent support unit, again, very common. One of the first units you're going to add. Merc choices, because you don't get Valachev to make them friendly faction, generally the Merc choices are skipped. Now, what you can do is take a unit called Chaosi Eliminators. Now, Chaosi Eliminators have the Partisan rule. The Partisan rule says whenever they're in a Khador army, they count as Khador models. So it's not really taking a mercenary, but they are eligible in the theme force. The Eliminators are really fast, hit decently hard, and are kind of hard to kill if your opponent can't hit their defense, which is a very good opposite to what the Man-O-War actually have. The Man-O-War are very low defense, high armor. The Eliminators are the opposite. They're high defense, low armor. So your opponent might not actually be able to kill the Eliminators that easily in a list they have designed to fight Armored Core. So this gives you a 2-girl unit. They can run around. They deal a decent amount of damage. Your opponent's going to struggle to kill them. And they count as in-faction choices. And they're not that expensive. So Chaosi Eliminators are a really good choice here. The Assassins are okay, especially if you need an element that we call a jamming element. Sometimes, well, more often than not in a Warmachine army, there's one unit that's job is to die, but to die as slowly as possible. And this unit is then usually shoved in your opponent's face, so you want a fairly fast unit. And your opponent just has to deal with it. It basically jams up the works in your opponent's army. It says, hey, you can't move where you want to do until you deal with my guys here. That may or may not be easy. Chaosi Assassins make a pretty good jam unit. Solos, long story short, yes. Just all of them. They're all really good. You have to choose who you're not bringing, which is kind of a first world problem. Let's start with the tankers. They're both pretty strong. Suppression helps with high defense and number of shots. He wins out more often than not in Armored Core because he helps you clear out opposing infantry and low armor models. He can help you make up for your lost number of attacks by playing in Man-O-War. The Strike Tanker is okay. It's not bad. It's like I said, the Suppression Tanker usually comes in first. The Man-O-War Dracoon is a Man-O-War on a giant horse. No, I am not kidding. The horse is armored. If you kill the horse, the Man-O-War gets off. He hits really, really, really hard. I mean, really hard. Which is something the Man-O-War really appreciate. And he's decently fast because he is on a horse. So, really good, hey, that thing has to die, go model. The Man-O-War Kalvnik has an ability called Desperate Pace. So, pick a Man-O-War unit within his command range and it gets +2 speed. Now, the reason it's +2 speed is kind of important is it doubles when you run. There's a difference between speed and movement. Movement is how far you move in the turn. Speed is your actual stat. I am completely sorry. Everything I just said is correct. The Man-O-War is +2 movement. So what happens is when you run 2 inches further. If it was +2 speed, like for some reason I was thinking it was for a few seconds, that would also double. So with the Kalvnik, you pick a Man-O-War unit. Essentially can run 10 inches that turn, or it can charge an extra 2 inches, just an extra 2 inches of movement, which on an army this slow is kind of important. The Forge Seer. So the Forge Seer is a reasonable choice, especially if you have a caster who likes to spend focus. The Forge Seer's biggest ability is Empower. He has some magic spells which he can use to cast and deal with incorporeal models, but one of his biggest abilities is called Empower. Essentially just give a Warjack a free focus point, which is really good. Mercenaries, generally not very common. The only one that you can argue is the Hermit of Henchhold, but that guy fits in literally every theme force. So, okay. Battle engines, there's 2 of these things. The Assault Chariot, which is the one in the picture up there, has a chain gun on it. Lots of shots. It has high explosive. Its attacks are actually area of effect attacks. So it has a decent number of shots. It's throwing these area of effects out there. They're power 10, so any light infantry just gets mulched by this thing. Both of them are also considered cavalry, so this thing gets to make impact attacks when it charges. It has dual. It's just really solid model. The only downside is it's really expensive. The Siege Chariot's big claim to fame is that it has the strongest gun in the game at power 20, although it is fairly short range and it slams your opponent back, which can be a good thing or a bad thing, depending on what you're trying to do. Both of them are perfectly reasonable choices. They're not terribly common, though. Not because they're bad, but because they're expensive. The Man-O-War are expensive. You only have 75 points. All right. Building the Armored Core. So I have a slightly better picture of Slorsha here. I didn't realize I had a duplicate in there. My apologies, everyone. All right. So your average list is going to start with a full unit of Shock Troopers and a full unit of Demo Corps. The Demo Corps must have their command attachment. The Shock Troopers are your defensive element. The Demo Corps are your offensive element. So the Demo Corps go against what you're trying to kill. The Shock Troopers go against the things that are going to try and kill your Demo Corps. From there, a very common thing to do is 2 suppression tankers, a Min Mechanic, and Arkanovich. Arkanovich is the support piece. The mechanics are helpful because they can keep your guys in line, especially if something just gets randomly damaged, and the suppression tankers help with your shot count. They bring a gun to the table and can deal with intervening models. From there, you can kind of just fill out what you want. It all really works. But that's kind of the standard, is a max Shock Troopers, max Demo Corps with Dragodovich, which is the command attachment. 2 suppression tankers, a Min Mechanic unit, and Arkanovich. At 75 points, the Demo Core Command Attachment and the 2 Suppression Tankers are free. So we haven't spent as many points as you might think. So from there, just kind of throw whatever you want in there. Generally, you're not going to build out Jack heavy. Sorcerer 3 is really the only one who can run a decent number of Jacks, and you're still going to start with that stuff I mentioned before. So she could fill in with 3 or 4 cheap Jacks. If you aren't going to go the cheap Jack option, the other best or most common answer is to take a single Victor. Long range gun, clears out guys. It's really hard to deal with in the late game, so what it does is it just sits back and plinks. Its job is just to lob mortar rounds over your army into your opponent's force. Caster selection. All the casters kind of work with this theme force, so it's just what do you want to do and who do you think is coolest. Generally, you're going to want to decide if you want the list to hit harder or get there easier. And that is a decision you have to make. And Armored Core isn't as a theme list that, if you're looking at it from a casual perspective, seems a little one-sided. And that's fine. Armored Core is a theme force that, from a tournament perspective, is really strong. Because in a Warmachine tournament, this is very different from a lot of miniature games, you bring multiple lists. You'll bring 2 lists to most event. You get your opponent, you sit down across from your opponent, you exchange army lists, and then you secretly pick one of your 2 lists to play against theirs. So, while the Armored Core, if it's just you and your friends might adapt to it fairly quickly. In a tournament setting, this is a really strong theme force, because if your opponent does not bring their Armored Core answer, and you put Armored Core on the table, their day is over. There's not much they're going to be able to do about it. So with that, have a good one, and I will see you for the next Theme Force video, which I think is going to be Exemplar Introduction. We'll have to see how it goes. Have a good one.
Hey, this is Dave. If you like what we're doing here at What Game Now, go ahead and click on one of the videos, which should be on either side of me, or click right in the middle and go ahead and subscribe to the channel. Don't forget to hit the bell once you subscribe so that you know when we have new videos. Please go ahead and share us with your friends. Let everybody know that we're here. Thank you for watching, and thank you for all of our subscribers already. And we look forward to bringing you more content every chance that we get.